This is Entrepreneurs Get Visible, the podcast for people who want more impact, influence, and income. I'm Anna Parker-Naples, and I'll be sharing with you proven methods from leading entrepreneurs that help you get visible as an authority in your field. Because anything's possible when you get visible.
Well, here we are again on the Entrepreneurs Get Visible podcast. The thing that we're diving into today is part of our Podcasting for Business series. Now, those of you who are already podcasting, I want you to use these episodes to make sure you're delivering your content in a much better way. Those of you who aren't podcasting, I'm really hoping that it's going to whet your appetite and make you realise it's really not as hard as you might think it is. So we're going to be diving in today into how to repurpose your podcast. But before I go into that, I want you to understand that the reason you would have a podcast in the first place is to amplify your message, to help you get so much more visible. And the reason you would want to do that is because I know that there's part of you that knows your work is transformational, that knows you can make that massive difference to other people's lives in terms of finance, relationship, self-growth, in terms of personal development, in terms of business goals. And if your message isn't heard by the right people, you cannot get those results for them. What we see for people who are podcasting on a regular basis and being a guest strategically is that their results are accelerating in a short period of time if they know what they're doing. And I would really like to invite you along to the masterclass that I'm putting together that is all about taking that next level. How can you be that person who stands out from the crowd? Because that's really what this podcast is all about. How can you be that person having the exceptional launches, getting that #1 bestseller, getting that #1 podcast? How can you make sure you are the one getting those results? Because certainly over my time in the entrepreneurial and coaching space over the last 3.5 years, I have learnt a lot. And one thing I hope that you realise about me and listening to this show is that I really do like to share the highs, the lows, the challenges from a very personal perspective, always driving you towards having exceptional results. So if you would like to come along to the Exceptional Results Masterclass, totally free, I would love you to be there. The link is going to be below, but if you've got pen and paper handy, you can go to annaparkernaples.co.uk/exceptional-results-masterclass. And we're going to be covering 7 steps that I've taken to create accelerated results for myself, not just in the online space, but the thoughts, habits and behaviours that I had in order for me to have incredible success in Hollywood and now in this arena as an expert author, as an expert podcaster. What is it that gives people like me, ambitious, driven entrepreneurs, the edge over the people who are ambitious and driven but not getting results? And I'm going to be sharing all of that in the Exceptional Results Masterclass, so I hope very much to see you there. It is on the 17th of September 2020. If you've missed that deadline, don't worry, because this one I know is very special, and I will invite you then to check out the link anyway, because we'll be sending you some information on that page about how you can find out about the next one. So on with the show. I don't normally do as much waffle at the top of my show as that, but I really do want you to step up this year. I feel as everyone's going back to school and the end of lockdown, things are starting to change. And if you've spent a lot of the 6 months at home thinking, I should be doing something more, well, now is the time to do it. I'm a big believer in that. So let's talk about this, how to repurpose your podcast. And the point of this is, how can you get your message amplified and into as many places as possible without having to recreate new content? How can you take that one moment of creation, perhaps 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 45 minutes, however long your episode is, and make it extremely useful for you from a strategical point of view? So the first thing about that is, you want people to find you in as many different platforms as possible. And that's one of the beauties of creating podcast content. So first of all, I want you to think about how are you going to create that content for your podcast in the first place. So sometimes when you're listening to me, I am sitting inside my home studio. And I know many of you won't necessarily have a fancy studio like I do, but you might be recording regularly from your study or your office. And that's absolutely fine. Other times you will know and be aware that I am outside recording a podcast on my phone as I'm delivering a Facebook Live or a LinkedIn Live or an Instagram Live. And you will know then that I share that with you where I am, the location I'm in, particularly if I'm at a conference or an event, I will let you know. So think about how, if you're creating the content in the first place, how could you make that go further? So if I've delivered something as a Facebook Live on my page and I've used a microphone, I use a great clip-on microphone, professional grade clip-on mic, so that I know the audio from that is going to be good enough quality to stand up on its own in the podcast space, because nobody likes listening to rubbish quality audio. Bit of a bugbear of mine. The other thing you could do is if you were ever hosting a summit or doing a series of guest expert sessions, you could create those and deliver them live via Zoom or StreamYard or whatever online platform you're thinking of doing it, and save all of that audio, download all of the audio and get it edited into podcast episodes. That's a great time-saving way to get more content out there. So think about this. Where are you already delivering video content where you can remove the audio and put it into a podcast? Other things I have done is when I've been on stage delivering talks, I have been recording myself. I've been mic'd up. I've had the mic pack in the back of my pocket or attached to the back of my dress, and I've used that material on my podcast. I don't think I've actually done it for this show, but I certainly did it for my previous show. So then once you've got that audio content, however you've created it, there are many things that you can do. So not only are you going to upload it to your host of preference, so my personal preference is Libsyn, but you might be using Podbean or Spreaker or one of the many, many other podcast hosts. You want to make sure then that once you've uploaded it to that host, not only are you getting into the main directories such as iTunes or Apple Podcasts, as it's now known, and Google Podcasts and Stitcher and Spotify, but you want to make sure whichever podcast host you're using is pushing it out to the magnitude of many smaller directories. And some of them, it happens automatically with your host, and some of them you do need to do a little bit of legwork to find exactly where you want your show to be positioned. Because if you're creating this epic content, and I hope it's epic and not a little bit rubbish around the corners, because if you're creating content and putting that time and effort into it and put your energy into it, why wouldn't you want it to reach as many places and people organically as it possibly can? So once you've got that then, whether you have created it as audio only or video as well, you are then able to upload onto YouTube. So then have it as part of your YouTube channel, driving people back to your podcast or driving people to your website even. You can then create either using the audio only or the video snippets that you've taken from your show. If you did use video to interview a guest, let's say, you could section that up into 1-minute snippets that you could then use on Twitter or Instagram in the grid or on your Instagram stories or your Facebook stories. So you can take that one piece of content that maybe you delivered live on a Facebook Live, and then you can reparcel it to reach more ears. Now, my personal preference for doing that is using Headliner. And Headliner is an app where you can choose the background imagery, or it can look very much like a video, and you see the waveform, the jumping up and down lines that indicate the audio is moving. And you can have subtitles on there, you can have captions on there, you can have imagery on there. And that's a really good way to drive attention to your show anyway, and some ongoing promotion. So as I said, I tend to use Headliner, but Wave with double V is also a very good app. And Capwing I've tried too, Kapwing. But using any of that content to put it into smaller segments that entices people onto your show. So you've got to make sure those 1-minute snippets actually are quite interesting and entertaining. So make sure they're the good bits, not the boring bits. The other thing then, to using your podcast to be repurposed into, first of all, show notes to accompany your show and using them to build your search engine optimization, which not only helps in terms of the show notes that are on iTunes and Spotify and Google, but also on your website to build your website search engine optimization up. And then normally on show notes, you would have lots of links and resources that you've mentioned in your show, and you would have the audio in a podcast player on your website. The other thing is that you could decide that you were going to take the meat of what you've talked about in that episode by delivering it live as a Facebook post, as a Facebook Live, and then recording it and then putting it into a podcast. You could then turn that into a much more fleshed out blog because you've already created the foundations of what you're going to talk about or write about in that blog. You can also then create templated images where you've got quotes that you've taken from your podcast, either that you've said or your guest has said, and actually make them into meme style content that you can put out there. So this works particularly well on Instagram, on your grid, where you would have quotes that are going to be engaging, motivating, inspiring, potentially a little bit disruptive. So think about what you can do that would be of interest to your audience because you've already created this content. The other thing I'm going to mention, which I haven't done yet, although part of this was in my mind as I was creating this Podcasting for Business series, is that I kind of had the idea that maybe if I delivered the episodes live first, that this could become content for my book. But as you know, I am a massive action taker. And as we went into lockdown, I actually wrote my book in the first 5 weeks, and I didn't want to wait until I'd done all of these episodes. But what you could do is think about, well, if I was to write a book and it was from the expert author point of view, what episodes would I need to create? And if you broke down your chapters, you could actually deliver the whole book live and then strip it out using something like Otter or Searchy or some other transcription service to get the wording that then becomes your book. So then that's something you can sell, which becomes really powerful. The other thing you can do if you've had guests on, perhaps you want to put together a book and then an audio book that is as long as you've got their permission, and that's very important when you are setting up those interviews, that they do give you permission over the audio and the content of what they talk about, that you could include those snippets, those transcriptions of those interviews into a book format. Obviously, there'd be a fair amount of editing and you'd want to make sure you got the best bits. But I've seen this be done by successful podcasters time and time again, and then they're monetizing their show on the side. So that's it. I really just wanted to show you the versatility that you have in terms of creating the podcast content and with how you can repurpose it to make sure that you're getting things out there. So if you are one of those people who struggles to write a weekly blog or a monthly blog, you start off and you do really well for a few weeks and then it goes by the wayside. When you're creating a podcast, knowing you have to show up for your audience week in, week out actually makes you much clearer and much more focused in delivering in the first place, because it gives you that kick up the backside that sometimes we need to just commit not only to ourselves, but to our listeners. And when you understand that your podcast can help you, your business, and your authority go even further, then why aren't you podcasting? Just a little question there for you. And as I round off with this episode, just going to remind you that I run the podcast membership. And if you would like to grab our free checklist, it is at annaparkernaples.co.uk/podcast checklist. And it teaches you everything you need to know. Well, not everything, because it's kind of detailed. As a checklist in everything you need to know in order to plan and then launch your show. It gives you a comprehensive view about what we're talking about to make that happen successfully. And then finally, I do just want to remind you that I mentioned at the top of this show about my Exceptional Results Masterclass, which is going to take you through my 7-step series of actions that I take, the actions, habits, routines, behaviours and strategies that I implement that have not only taken me to Hollywood and beyond, but that have allowed me to have the incredible success I have with this show, with my first book, what's going to happen with my second book, and really just building a very successful business in a short amount of time. So if you would love to join us for that, I'd love to have you there. It's how to get exceptional results. The mastermind link is beneath these show notes. And that is it for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Entrepreneurs Get Visible. To get your free checklist on how to raise your profile and to find out about our community, go to annaparkernaples.co.uk/get visible.